and welcome to our very first meeting in our very new space. Mr. Saeed likes to say this is a historic moment, being our first official meeting here today. So I will just call us to order. Thank you for joining us for the May 16th, 2024 meeting of the Policy Management Committee. Before I go on, I want to give my colleagues a moment to introduce themselves, and then we can go down to the table, alongside. I want to start with you.
Good. I was going to say good morning, but it is afternoon.
It is afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Brenda Wolf, and I live in District 5.
Good afternoon, Shebra Evans. So good to see everybody.
Good afternoon, Sami Saeed, student member, and yes, like Ms. Mondrosky said, this is history, and I always like to say it. So these are some of the first words spoken in the new Board of Education room from Montgomery County, which is very, very exciting to me, so very cool.
Tom, did you want to introduce yourself?
All right, Tom Lockman, Deputy Chief of Staff to the Board of Education.
Victoria Van Dyke, Board Staff.
You guys want to introduce yourselves?
Lori Christina Webb, Chief of Staff for the Board.
Eric Ursey, Board Staff.
And in front we have
Stephanie Williams, General Counsel, Montgomery County Public Schools.
Sally Davis, Supervisor, Policy and Records, Montgomery County Public Schools.
Good afternoon. Leslie Turner Percival, Legal Director in the Office of General Counsel for Montgomery County Public Schools.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Stephanie Brandt, Director of Pre-K-12 Curriculum, Operations and Support in the Office of Instructional Curriculum and Instructional Programs in Montgomery County Public Schools.
That's a mouthful. Need a really big business card.
Good afternoon, Nico Durazio, Senior at Wheeling High School and also Education Policy Apprentice in the Department of College and Career Readiness and District-wide Programs.
Great, thank you. I'm Rebecca Smondrosky. I represent District 2, and I'm the chair of the Policy Committee. So first things first, I want to ask if there are any questions or concerns regarding the informational summaries for the February 27th meeting. Anyone? No? All right. Then we will consider those approved. And we'll keep moving. This afternoon, we're going to be reviewing 3 different policies for which public comments were recently received. Policy IKB, which is our homework policy, policy IOD, Education of English Language Learners, and their new policy GEA, which is the board appointment of MCPS leaders. For each policy, staff will present information regarding the public comments received, as well as recommendations for the revisions that may have been made based on those comments. The committee will then consider action to recommend presentation of each policy draft to the full board for final approval. This committee is also receiving an item of information on regulations approved by the interim superintendent's office between February and April of this year. And with that overview, I will ask staff to go ahead and take it away.
Good afternoon. Thank you. We are starting with policy IKB. Joining us at the table is Stephanie Brandt and Nico Durazio, who earlier introduced themselves. They and other members of the writing team seated behind us have been instrumental in the policy IKB rewrite project. We will be presenting the changes the writing team has made to policy IKB in response to comments received during the public comment period. But first, I'll turn it over to Mr. Durazio to provide an overview of the commenters and engagement activities.
Thank you, Ms. Turner Percival, and good afternoon, members of the committee. You'll notice in your public engagement summary for policy IKB that our stakeholder engagement began well in advance of the public comment period. The last time we met, we gave you a thorough description of our student outreach efforts during the summer of 2023. To recap, extensive feedback was sought and received during July of 2023 from teachers and nearly 200 students who participated in discussion groups and completed questionnaires that informed the initial policy drafting stage. Since the board took tentative action on March 19th, you'll note a wide variety of efforts to distribute the draft and seek comments through text, email outreach, publications from staff, students, and families. In addition, memos to principals requested that they communicate through their school channels. On a personal note, I'd like to just convey how important this work has been to me. As we all know, homework has certainly been a hot topic throughout the years. Remembering back to every single class that I've been in, homework has always been at the center of the conversation. In fact, you'll notice our student response was so enthusiastic that students used all available public comment channels to comment, even submitting homework comments in response to other policies. And as a student, I'm all too familiar with the conversations of how much homework we were receiving, the difficulty of each homework, and to be honest, the hours-long FaceTime calls I would have to go through to work through some burdensome homework problems. And despite being student advocates, we had no way of fixing the problems that we faced with homework until now. Knowing the needs of students, parents, and guardians, teachers, and the community, I am so incredibly proud to present this work, having been able to meet firsthand with fellow students from the Montgomery County Regional Student Government Association, the SMOB Advisory Council, and now 15 student focus groups across the county. I am confident that this policy reflects the needs of students today. Truthfully, I feel that IKB is not just another piece of educational policy, but instead a policy written both by and for the MCPS community. I'd like to turn it now to Ms. Brandt to discuss the public comments that we received.
He is a tough act to follow. Good afternoon, members of the Policy Management Committee. I'm Stephanie Brandt, like previously, the Director of Pre-K-12 Curriculum Operations and Support in the Office of Curriculum and Instructional Programs. Thank you, Nico. You will recall our first presentation to the committee, in which we gave our community the opportunity to highlight issues of importance to them and concerns that they wanted to see addressed in the policy. During the second phase, we again reached out to our community to direct them to the public comment site. We provided the community an opportunity to see the policy and asked 2 more questions. Does the policy reflect your understanding of the purpose of homework, and do you believe the policy meets the needs of all students? We heard from students, staff, parents and guardians, and community members. The predominant themes that emerged from adult respondents were concerns about inequity, including economically disadvantaged students and emergent multilingual learners, support for differing purposes and expectations by elementary and secondary level, the need for more explicit attention to the needs of emergent multilingual learners, and the importance of homework as part of the student learning experience. We learned that the vast majority strongly agreed the policy reflects their understanding of the purpose of homework, which we believe demonstrates a strong alignment between the predominant themes that emerged and the draft policy viewed by the public. The majority agreed the policy met the needs of all students. When we dug further into about a quarter who disagreed, we found strong support for the policy, but repeated concerns about variance in resources and parental support in homes. Some highlighted the desire for more language about the needs of students receiving English language development programming and services and students receiving special education services, which we addressed in the response before you today. MCPS student respondents provided feedback around the amount of time spent on homework. We also had a significant number of comments from students that there should be no homework on weekends. When we look at the survey responses and policy IKB, we see a strong alignment between the values and priorities of the board and our stakeholders. You'll see that in the revised draft revisions in response to the comments, which Ms. Davis will present now.
Thank you, Mr. D'Orazio. Ms. Brandt. Let me take you to page 2. We found just a few places that we needed to tune up, so I'm going to take you to line 36 to 41. We reworded this to get a smoother read. On page 3, from 55 to 62, we realized that we did not intend to say that teachers could not assign group work. That wasn't at all what we meant. We were trying to focus on the value of assessment if it involves a lot of adult support at home. So we reworded it to say that homework assigned to individual students or groups of students has diminished value to assess student learning if it requires the support of others, e.g. parent, guardians, or tutors. Moving down to line 74 on that same page, we had referenced students with IEPs or 504 plans, but we had not referenced students with English learner plans that they may qualify for under federal law. So we've added that. If I could take you to page 4, lines 85 to 97. We worked this out in response to some of your comments previously at the committee level and are suggesting this, that when a student will be absent for religious observance, students and parent guardians are encouraged to notify the student's teacher in advance to make arrangements for making up homework needed for the student to progress in the course. And then added that the superintendent, the school's designee, will establish homework makeup procedures.
Do you want me to say something now or wait till you're done?
Your choice.
Just on that section, I'm concerned that it doesn't clearly enough express that they should only need to make up the homework if it's mandatory for them to proceed or progress in the course. The discussion that we had is basically the fact that, you know, when we close schools and it's on a holiday, nobody gets assigned homework or anything. But if a child is not in school due to observing a religious holiday, they have been expected to come back and make that work up. And that doesn't seem equitable.
We did try to emphasize just that homework needed to progress in the course.
Okay. I just wasn't sure, like, to me, I didn't know if it was clear enough without, like, having an only homework for making up homework, or only the homework needed for the student to progress in the course. But,
Okay.
colleagues, thoughts?
I think,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Cheryl.
I will say, I think it's clear. I think maybe because we're so hyper-focused that we just wanted to be really, really specific.
I just
but-
like specificity so that there's not inconsistency among schools and teachers.
So I was like, that was my takeaway,
Okay.
but we'll hear what defer to the majority.
Well, actually, my comment wasn't on this. I was waiting until you finished to
Okay.
raise
Sorry.
my comment. So since she interrupted you, could we
She
go
was
back
looking at me.
and I have a question on line 46, 45 and 46. It says, however, family-supported daily reading for enjoyment is consistently affirmed. I would like to see something, and this is just my thought on it, a little stronger, because I read a lot of the parent comments, and of course, a lot of the parents want something. But I think if we said something around the idea that research shows that reading 20 minutes a day is useful, or something like that, but affirmed, you know, I don't think it addresses the issues that the parents raised about they'd like to see something. So I'd like, if we put in that the research supports reading 20 minutes a day is useful to elementary school students, however you want to phrase it, that would be my suggestion.
I'm comfortable with
Thank
that. Colleagues, any objections to that?
No, I fully agree.
Okay. And then I need a kind of decision on if it should be a little stronger language in making up homework, only making up the homework needed for, so it would be only the added to it.
Which line are you referring to?
I'm sorry,
She's on line,
89.
yeah. But I have a question. Is the language written out about holidays that we're closed on, so that you could just add consistent language in here for that?
Oh, that's a good
You
question.
understand what I'm
I do, it's a very good question. I don't remember seeing anything about,
I mean, we know that there's no homework, let's say, on those days, but
Right.
is there language already written on it that you could just incorporate into this?
Is that a practice?
It often tends to be a practice in schools where where they'll designate those times as no homework days, but that's designated per the school. I don't believe it's MCPS policy or regulation.
okay.
Okay. I think what Rebecca's looking for is a consistent application, so we need some sort of consistent statement.
Regardless of what your religious holiday is.
I understand what this says, but I also hear her concern. I don't have language right away. You might want to think about it and come back.
I thought if you just added only the after making up, making up only the homework needed for the student to progress in the course. Was just my thought on it.
So you want to make it more like specific to the homework that they had missed, rather than just homework as a vague term in
Right,
general.
well, I want to make it more specific in the sense of if they missed homework, that they absolutely have to progress in the course. But if it's just a regular assignment for something, practice, for example, I don't think that they need to come back and have that added onto their homework for the next day, or whatever. You have something, Mr. Luckman?
Yeah, so I was just going to ask for staff, if that's the intention in the language that immediately follows that, the superintendent of schools or designee will establish homework makeup procedures, that would be where the consistency that I think you're talking about would live. If that makes sense.
It makes
So-
sense as long as it's actually in there. We don't
I think it is in there.
do the approval of the superintendents or their designees.
Yeah.
Procedures.
Yeah, so I think what you're looking to establish with this language would be that the homework makeup procedures that ultimately were developed would reflect only the homework that is necessary for progress in the course.
What I'm suggesting is that we have kids who come and used to come and testify before us, and this was a big deal for a long time, that because before, like, for example, before we did an in-service day for Eid and things like that, the suggestion was that when they take off for their religious holiday, because everybody else is in school and they all get their assignments, they come back and now they have double the work. And the purpose was to eliminate the need for that unless it's an absolute necessity for the progression of the course. So that, it's kind of equal, because if we're shut down for a Jewish holiday, nobody gets assigned homework. But if we're open for one and some kids are taking off for it, then teachers very well may go ahead, if it's only one kid missing, and make assignments.
So I think, the way that you want to do that is, instead of saying for making up homework, it would be for making up only the homework
Correct.
needed. And I'm okay with that, because that's basically what it's already saying. So instead of, to make arrangements for making up homework needed for the student to progress, instead be to make arrangements for making up only the homework needed for the student to progress in the
Exactly.
course, rather than just, I see what you're saying, because it's not equitable that because you celebrate this religious observance,
Right.
that you don't get the time off rather than another one. I'm okay with that. I think that's very fair.
Okay, thank you. Brenda's okay with that, too?
So I think this language is probably in our regulation or procedures, but do we have a distinction between homework for a grade versus homework for practice?
Okay.
And I think that it would be helpful if we define, since we have defined categories of homework, then perhaps what the language could be here is making up homework, if I have the terms correct, for practice versus for a grade, whatever we call those two. So if we specifically define the type of homework.
I'm fine with that, too. Like I said, as long as it's just emphasizing that they only have to do what they really need to get done. Is that okay? Yeah. All right. All right, then. We can pick back up on line 99.
Let's go to page 5. We just wanted to pick up again that purposely designed homework also includes accommodation requirements that we laid out previously, the IEPs, 504s, and EL plans. And then finally, we have substituted age appropriate for grade level appropriate. It seems to satisfy some more of the comments. And that is all we have.
All right. Great. So I will open it up to Mr. Said.
All right, hello, everyone. First, I want to just say a few things with the policy itself. I think it was received very positively by the community, which I really liked. Looking just through the public comments, I think most people fully agreed with the changes, said it made homework more important and meaningful, I think, to instruction, more related to instruction, based on research best practices that actually show, what type of homework is actually effective and what isn't. And I think this policy aligns really well with that. So I was really happy to see that. And we all know, this is something I'm very passionate about. Homework is something students are very passionate about. And so I know before I was introducing some ideas around homework over the weekend and having in-class time to do homework, and so I've thought a lot about that. And I've looked over some of the public comments, which I want to highlight here about homework over the weekend to kind of preface some of the things that I want to say, which is, here's one of them from an MCPS student. Please change the homework policy. Having homework over the weekend is not only stressful, but takes away time from family and friends, as the weekend is the only days that we as students have breaks. So that's one comment I've received that, I thought was important. This is another one that kind of goes into more depth, especially for high schoolers. Homework given over the weekend, as well as other homework types, can be counterproductive. Most students use the weekend as the one time in the week that they can relax because they already have to come back in 2 days anyways. Really 1 day because Sunday is spent preparing for school the next day. So that's another thing that's kind of talking about the fact that that weekend time is really the only time a lot of students get, especially for our students who are taking rigorous courses, magnet programs, whether you look at AP courses. And I think a lot of students feel like they need that time for rest and relaxation, and they have no time for breaks if they have homework over the weekend. Like I see another comment here from a student. I feel the biggest issue with homework as a high school student taking numerous APs and rigorous courses is how teachers all feel like that they slam you with homework. I got 3 hours of sleep last night just because of the abundance of homework I received. Another issue is weekends. I never get a break. I'm slammed with homework on weekdays as well as weekends. It is a constant work from start to end of the school year and is horrible for my mental health. I would love to see a change to give students a reasonable break. So, when we talk about homework over the weekend, and I think a lot of students who feel really stressed out right now and feel like they need a break, what I kind of think is we want to make a balance, right? The balance between giving teachers autonomy in how they assign homework, but also a balance in giving students, I think, a break that they do need and a break that they do deserve, especially in the mental health crisis we have now. But I wanted to think of a way to implement this that was aligned with what's already in the policy. So basing it off of what's already there. So the way that I thought of is if we go to the section of purposeful design, which I believe starts on line 99.
Yep.
So this is all about how the homework is designed. I thought this was the best section. So my proposal is when you look there, you see multiple things, A, B, C, and they all talk about the design of homework. My proposal would be to add another section that starts with, so the outline starts with teachers shall design homework so that, and I want to add a section that says, it is assigned in alignment with best practices to promote student well-being and allow for flexibility in order to accommodate diverse learning styles and individual schedules. And then as a subpoint to that, because there were subpoints in the previous, to specify when appropriate and feasible, students should have an opportunity to complete homework during classroom time. So always keeping the appropriate and feasible in alignment with how the policy is worded in other areas to ensure it's not forcing teachers to do anything. And specifically, when it does not delay classroom instruction, teachers should seek alternatives rather than assigning homework that would require students to work on it over the weekend. So again, when it does not delay classroom instruction, when it's feasible for teachers, not that they should be forced, but that they should try and seek alternatives rather than assigning work that be forced for students to complete over the weekend. So that would be, an assignment that is given on Friday that's either due Sunday night or Monday morning that would require students to complete it over the weekend. I think that this does give students that flexibility, that autonomy they need, as well as teachers. And based on some of the public comments here I've seen, I think I counted over 20 separate comments from students alone about homework on the weekends, just on the weekends. I think it does relate to what our community wants to see, what our students want to see, and I think it's a good way to balance the two. So that's the amendment I would propose that hopefully I think is in line with the rest of the policy. It's not disruptive. It's not kind of counterproductive. It's very fluid with what is already in the policy. So that's the amendment I'd like to bring forward, and I want to hear your guys' thoughts, of course.
You can go ahead, Ms. Evans. I'm going to need you to repeat it before I go. Okay.
So making this big of a change for 20 students seems to be a lot for me. What I would like is time to really digest it, because me hearing it right now is a no for me. And there are other, we have other colleagues that could weigh in, but I want to keep it as is. So I would not accept the amendment.
Ms. Wolf, you want to go?
Yeah, I too need time to digest that and think about it a little bit more. I want to revisit the comments that were submitted while I think about it. And I do think we need to talk to our fellow board members about it also.
Yeah, I agree with my colleagues. However, I too had remembered that you had asked about that. So in section B, I was going to recommend just providing students opportunities for seeking homework support during class as feasible and appropriate, and avoiding homework on the weekends when possible.
I'm okay with that as well, as long as I know that usually we don't like to make amendments when we bring it to the full board. We like to do it here, so that's why I'd like to bring it, we know it obviously wouldn't be set in stone, but it'd be brought to the whole board. But Ms. Mondrosky, I'm okay with that as well. I'm okay with a less invasive amendment, as long as it has the same concept of, when appropriate and feasible, giving students that leeway to possibly complete homework in class when, for example, teachers extra time in class. That's what I hear all the time, is sometimes there's extra time in class, and sometimes homework is only assigned at the end, despite there being time that we could use already to complete it. And as long as it reiterates that we should try and not give homework that be forced to complete over the weekend, I'm okay with any sort of way. And I want to just bring that to the full board, because whenever we try and make amendments to the full
Yeah,
board,
no,
it
that's
always gets pushed back and it just
correct.
doesn't go through. So this would be the place, I think, to do it and bring
Absolutely.
it to the full
This
board.
is the place.
Yeah.
Are you all okay with adding that language, avoiding homework on the weekends whenever possible, or when possible? I mean, it doesn't,
It doesn't, I understand
Dictate.
what you're saying. I have to think about it.
Okay.
So I'll think about it.
okay.
So my thoughts are, I don't know that it has to be that explicit in
Yeah, I
the
think
policy,
that-
right?
I kind of feel the same way. I'm wondering if, when you do the regulations, if that isn't a better place for it, actually.
I agree with that. My thought is that if it's nowhere in the policy, we can't ensure that that would be anywhere in the regulations. So my thought was, I wanted to give something more general, and we can find wording. I think that's even more loose. I mean, we're just kind of thinking on our toes right now. But my thought is, I want to include something general in the policy, so when they write the regulation, it's at least present there and they have guidance. Because as the policy is now, there would be nothing at all that they would have to put in there. And my worry would be, and it is, let's say 20 comments, but the comments are representative of the larger
They
community.
reflect.
So 20 students commenting here, maybe, and I know for a fact really it is thousands or tens of thousands of students who believe this way, who didn't get the opportunity to comment. And so what I think is, if we can include something in the policy, whether it's vague, that just at least touches on the concept of trying not to to avoid homework that students will be forced to complete over the weekend, and giving them opportunities when feasible in class to complete it. Something in there that says that in the policy, when they develop the regulation, they can go into much more depth. But, similar to how there's a lot of things in the policy that reiterate, students have a clear understanding of the assignment. They're meaningful. It has accommodation requirements for very specific things. Just adding in there also, as well as this, so then when we write the regulation, it reflects that nature, that action the students want to see.
I'm supportive of that, but
I have to think about that. I just really do. The other purpose of education is to teach some life skills, and it seems to me that we're moving further and further away from teaching kids skills they're going to need in college. So I need to think about that. Thank you.
any comments from the panel? Any thoughts on it? No? Okay.
Point of clarification, though. Well, while we're making these wording changes, I mean, some of them we're actually making. The one I had about the research, we did not make, so.
You can, if you want, to
Well,
propose something.
do we need a
no,
motion?
I wanted them to come back with a proposal.
Okay.
That doesn't need a motion or anything to come
No,
back with a.
it doesn't. I'm really
Okay.
just
Yeah, no,
trying to
she's just
figure out,
asking.
since
Okay.
we all agreed to it, when does it, when does it get done? Because we don't want to take it to the full board without that being in there like that.
That was my only, that's the only reason I was saying, if you wanted to propose something now, so that it can be added in
Well,
before it goes to the full
that's-
board.
I'm open to suggestions for language.
Okay.
I actually liked what you said about the research showing that 20 minutes of reading a day is
I took it to mean we should write that sentence in. That's what I took, that we should write in, research supports reading 20 minutes a day.
It's beneficial to younger children.
It's beneficial
Okay.
to younger children.
Yep, I'm in favor of that.
Okay, I'm in too.
Okay.
And then on that note, if we could maybe look into wording, that would reflect the, at least, bringing to the full board wording that would highlight giving students opportunities in class to complete homework and making it so, unless it's necessary, trying not to make it so students would have to complete homework assignment over the weekend. So then we could bring it to the board, and then we could have time to reflect on that, think about it, and then the whole board could decide. I want to just see if we can move that forward to the board.
I mean, the sentence I heard was to follow line 115. So it already starts with providing opportunities for seeking homework support during class as feasible and appropriate, and avoiding homework over the weekend when possible.
I'm okay with that, since, it already has the first part. Yeah, it would just be adding that second piece.
Just for your comfort, could we have them put it in, and then when it goes to the full board, it can be removed? Because I think it's easier to
Yeah.
remove stuff at the board. Okay.
Yes, so we could put it in as an amendment, and then it would be brought, and we would say, do we want to keep this or not, basically?
Right. Okay.
Ms. Mondrowski, you can highlight it for the board when it comes to the board that this is an item of discussion.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So we are at, I think, 117? Well,
I had finished presenting
oh,
changes.
great. All right.
Yep.
Anybody have any other thoughts, comments, or concerns?
Ms. Mondrowski, just to clarify direction on the point about only the homework needed for students to progress in the course in the case of a religious holiday. Just want to confirm that we're all on the same page about what specific language may be different than is in here currently as we prepare that recommendation to move forward.
On line 90, I added
Only the.
in
Okay.
between up and homework.
Okay. So what I see that the amendments that are being considered to the staff recommendation are the reading 20 minutes a day sentence that we referenced, the only that homework at line 90, and then the discussion item at line 115 that we just referenced.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All on the same page? Okay, so then I will move that we submit this policy as amended to the full board for consideration. All in favor?
Oh, okay.
And that's unanimous. Okay.
And can we clarify consideration or final action?
Oh, I'm sorry, final action. Consideration of final action by the full board. We'd like to think that it will definitely be final action, but all right, so what do we have next? Next up, we are going to do a review of the public comments and proposed revisions to policy IOD, Education of English Language Learners.
Thank you. Joining us at the table is Mrs. Tamara Hewlett, Director, Department of English Language Learners and Multilingual Education. Mrs. Hewlett has been instrumental in the policy IOD project. Accompanying us here are the members of the writing team who have worked for many months to bring this draft to you. Mrs. Nikki Hazel, Jared Velasquez, Ms. Angela McLean, Ms. Vicky Lake Parkan, and Dr. Keisha Addison, who has been collaborating with us as we review comments. We'll be presenting the changes the writing team have made to policy IOD in response to comments received during the public comment period. But first, I'll turn to Mrs. Hewlett to provide an overview of the commenters and engagement activities. Mrs. Hewlett?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Ms. Percival. Good afternoon, Ms. Mondrowski, Mrs. Evans, Ms. Wolf, and Mr. Said. You'll notice in our public engagement summary for policy IOD that our stakeholder engagement began well in advance of the public comment period. Extensive feedback was sought and received during July 2023 from close to 200 students. as well as teachers who completed questionnaires during discussion groups that were informed, that have informed the initial policy drafting stage. Prior to and after the board took tentative action on April 11th, you'll note a wide variety of efforts to distribute the draft and seek comments through presentations that were provided and give students and staff given opportunities to comment. We reached out to students via a few avenues. We had the International Admissions and Enrollment Student Advisory Committee participate. We went to the MCR General Assembly. Students in the English Language Development programs at Einstein and Wooten participated. And we even visited the SMOB Advisory Council. We reached out to PCCs, our parent community coordinators, who work to facilitate parent connections to their students' learning. We utilize text messaging, emails, outreach, and publications for staff, students, and families through the communications office. And we engaged our principals, requesting that they communicate the opportunity to provide public comment through their school channels. Commenters provided feedback on a variety of topics. Staffing, the topic of staffing was very prevalent. Language of instruction and assessment was very prevalent. And then we had a fewer comments on topics such as instructional models, for example, two-way immersion, sheltered instruction, instruction for our students with limited or interrupted formal education. So 2 to 3 comments for about each of those instructional models. We had comments about curriculum, what we call ELD curriculum, the absence of, the utilization of, et cetera. We had comments on the naming conventions, EML versus EL versus ELL versus ESOL versus ML. Lots of naming conventions out there. Some of the comments showed that many people were okay with the policy and the name changes. Some equated the E for emerging with a WIDA level of emerging. Some wanting to just go to MLs. Some wanted to go back to ESOL, et cetera. We had comments about reclassification. Those are the students who exit program. A few about certification, grading, and expectations of our EMLs being similar to that of monolingual English speakers, and that not being okay. So a few words about the naming conventions. You'll note that we've changed the name of the policy to English Language Development Programs and Services to clarify that this policy addresses multilingual learners learning to understand, speak, read, and write English in school at the same time that they are learning at least one other language at home. Ms. Davis will address our recommended responses to the draft. In the draft, I'm sorry. Ms. Davis?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hewlett. Okay, let's start with the title. As you can see, we changed it. Continuing on that page, the statement to affirm the responsibilities of all MCPS educators for the education of students who currently or formerly received English language development programs or services. That was in the policy. It was just a little bit lower, and we thought it really needed to be brought up with more prominence, so we brought it forward. Let's see. Pages 2 and 3 have been reorganized a bit. We wanted to present the federal, state, and local requirements in a more hierarchical manner. Then on page 3, line 159, you'll notice page 3.
I'll say.
Page 3, line 58 and 59.
58, okay.
Sorry. We have referenced the accommodations available to EML students under law at lines 68 to 74. We clarified a little bit more the meaning of EML to emphasize that it's an inclusive term, but not a homogeneous group, and that these students vary widely in their prior life experiences, continuous or interrupted education, literacy in their home language, and the age they enter MCPS. Then later on page 4, line 96 and 97 reiterates that point, especially the being mindful of literacy in another language, as that directly impacts their ability to learn to read in English. Then at, let's see, line 102, we changed the word from hold to prepare emergent language learners to meet the same high expectations of learning established for all students. Page 5, lines 123, 129. Oh, I'm sorry, I need to back up. Page 5, lines 113 to 116. There were, in response to a number of questions about assessment, we wanted to emphasize that we will administer assessments to EMLs currently receiving ELD program in a valid and reasonable manner and provide them with the accommodations they may be entitled to under federal law. Then lower down, provide professional learning for all staff on assessment accommodations and instructional accommodations to which students in the ELD program are entitled to under federal law. Let's move over to page 8, lines 202 to 211. To rework some of the language about assessing students with disabilities. It now reads, when a student is suspected of having a disability that requires special education and related services, MCPS will use available evaluation tools in the student's dominant language. If an appropriate evaluation tool is unavailable in the student's dominant language, data shall be triangulated with analyses of developmental history, educational history, literacy progress, and evolving English language proficiency. If I can take you over to page 11. You will see that among the superintendent's duties is to establish expectations for the shared responsibility of all MCPS educators to support students formerly or currently receiving ELD programming. And finally, on page 12, lines 314 to 316, to respond to the comment about staffing, to effectively allocate staff and material resources annually. And with that, we are ready for your thoughts and discussion.
Great, thank you. I will open it up to my colleagues for any conversation or thoughts or changes. Looks like we're all good. Well done. I do want to take a quick moment and just thank you all so much for the thorough job you did on trying to prepare this, and in particular the outreach. I know we already thanked the homework policy group for their extensive outreach, but I wanted to tell you how much I appreciated being able to see that all of our stakeholder groups were adequately represented, so thank you for that.
I agree. I second that.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so that concludes that section. So we will go ahead and move on to the review of public comments and proposed revisions to our new policy, GEA, board appointment of MCPS leaders.
Ms. Mondrowski, can we just confirm action to move?
Yes, I apologize.
Yep.
Yes, so I'd like to move that we forward this to the full board for final action.
Second.
All in favor? Okay. Now we'll move on to the
Thank you, Mrs. Mondrowski. Joining us at the table is Ms. April Key, Chief of the Office of Human Resources and Development. And also joining us is Dr. Harris, Executive Director of OHRD, and Dr. Christine Handy. Oh, Christine Handy won't be here. Apologize for that. To discuss policy GEA, they and other members of the writing team have been instrumental in the Policy GEA Rewrite Project. We will be presenting the changes the writing team has made to Policy GEA in response to comments received during the public comment period. I'll turn it over to Ms. Key to provide an overview of the commenters and the engagement activities.
Thank you, Ms.
Turn your light on, yeah, thanks.
Good afternoon, Ms. Wolf, Mrs. Mondrosky, Mrs. Evans, and Mr. Said. You'll notice in your public engagement summary for Policy GEA that our stakeholder engagement began well in advance of the public comment period. Throughout November, December, and January, we engaged MCCPTA, elementary, middle, and high school administrators, professional learning communities of school, and central office administrators. In your public engagement summary, you'll note the wide range of themes raised in these conversations. For example, the feedback we received from MCCPTA focused on interview panel processes, which are established in the draft we're reviewing today. I'll note a few. As requested, positions filled in by part-time, temporary, or acting administrators are discussed with the board so as to limit the number of acting principals being in their position for a long time. We take very seriously the comment that stakeholders who are impacted by the appointment should be part of the interview process, which is why we call for identified categories of stakeholders to participate on interview panels. And we can elaborate on these categories and selection processes further. We've also codified the board's existing practice of surveying interview panelists after the interview, with that feedback going directly to the board. We take to heart the need for transparency in the process and appreciate the need to codify the board's commitments in policy and codify the implementing procedures and regulatory language that will follow. And I do use the word codify deliberately, so I'd like to say a few words about that. The board's commitment needed to selection and approval processes needed to be codified with important additions to address pressing concerns. However, where a number of these practices were in place, we appreciate the opportunity to formally document them. Institutional memory was insufficient, and previous documentation of procedures needed to be reviewed, revised, and published. I'd like to briefly address the professional growth system as it applies to administrators and how they are evaluated after they are appointed to the position. The professional growth system, which has been in place for many years, provides mentoring as principals move into principalships, then has clear timelines for professional review. I'll turn to Ms. Davis now to highlight changes in response to comments.
Thank you, Ms. Key. All right, I will take you through the changes we're making in response to public comment, beginning on page 4. This is where we have added the language about temporary part-time employees. So it now reads, "The board shall approve in closed session any administrator vacancy anticipated to be filled in an acting capacity by current staff or temporary part-time employees for more than 45 days.
I appreciate that. I would like to add, or consultants. So by current staff or temporary part-time employees or consultants for more than 45 days. And I had a question about the acting capacity. Is that the only, if we put somebody in, like, does it need to include the word interim, for example, instead of just acting?
I'm going to defer to Ms. Key on this.
Anybody under the superintendent is acting, only the superintendent is interim.
Okay, I just wasn't sure. I wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Okay.
That was
if
the
I
only
can
comment I had about that section.
Take you to page 5. We noticed we needed to clarify something that came across other than how we intended it. We heard in the comments that some commenters thought we were actually providing the interview candidate with the actual names of people.
I have that on here. That's-
Right.
I'm like, why would we be
And-
doing that? We need to write
And
it.
that is not at all what was intended, but we did clarify it. So MCPS will establish standards for categories of stakeholders to be represented on interview panels for school-based and central office-based positions. Categories will be informed of the categories of stakeholders represented prior to the interview.
Of the categories, okay, not actually of the participants, right? Okay,
Okay? And then the last revision I'd like to bring to your attention is on page 9, lines 251 to 255. We are responding, as Ms. Key brought up, the professional growth systems and how they provide ongoing support and regular evaluation of leaders in order to promote the highest quality, integrity, experience, and commitment to the success of all students and staff.
yes, great,
And with that, we are ready for your discussion and comments.
okay. I have a couple of comments, but I will defer to my colleagues first if they want to go.
Yeah, so I have a quick, kind of more of an inquiry if there is something we could add here. So when it says on line 174 to 75, which is the board shall be provided the following materials during closed session. I think all these things are great. I know one thing that I'd kind of thought about before was also, because I know we had done this in the past, after, I like to say, I realize in board docs you can go back like 10 years, and so I did, of course, because I'm very curious, and I looked at what we were provided, and there was also, in addition to all of these things, a letter basically explaining the rationale behind choosing the candidate. And that's something that we had done. It's provided there, and I was wondering if we could get that here in the policy, because it has great things: interview panels, the composition of the panel's top preferences among candidates interviewed, all this, and I think that would be the last piece that I feel would kind of give a holistic viewpoint. So just in addition to all those things, I don't know if it's something we could add, just a letter of explanation to like the reasons, whether it be experience. We've seen blah, 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 XYZ, whatever it may be, just a letter of explanation to why the candidate was chosen, just so the board has a better understanding if they don't, know the person or anything like that.
I would wonder, did you want that for every candidate or only for a situation where it doesn't look as though they chose the person that came out highest on the list?
Because that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so that would probably be the case where we would need it. If that's more feasible, I'm okay with that as well. I just know the reason I said is because in the past it seemed we had done it for every position, but it would be that would be the case where I would think it's most necessary is when the panelists rated someone else, we chose them below. Maybe in that case we can provide a letter. I'm okay with that.
I can go along with that. I think trying to provide a letter for every situation is a bit much. Thank you.
I concur with that.
I agree with that. So if the panelists select one person as the most like person, we pick someone else, maybe then a letter of explanation, I think is fair, if we agree with that.
Yeah, and I also added to that, because I had that as well, a screening chart that, we can go back and reference, as well as in this section, I'd like to add the copy of the applicant's application, of each applicant's application.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, you could get that information, but we're not qualified human resource people, so we would not be really in the best position to evaluate that. I think that what comes forward, if you have questions, you ought to raise questions, but I don't necessarily want to see anybody's actual application.
The application is confidential.
Oh, okay. Okay. I would like to better understand, though, how applications are gone through and chosen for interviews. I've had some great concerns over some of our appointments that are coming up about people that are qualified, not being given an opportunity to interview. And so that was sort of my thinking when I asked about the screening chart. Like, what is it that's making one candidate if two candidates have both been doing the same job for so long, what makes one candidate qualified for an interview and the other one not? And so I'm not sure the best way of doing that, but it needs to be done.
I tend to think that's too much for the regulation, the policy. You know, you have the policy and then you have the procedures you're gonna outline around it, which I do wanna comment on a little later. But I hear what you're saying and I understand your concern. I think that the point that Sammy just raised would address your concern in the future.
It wouldn't, though, because the candidates that they would be referencing would only be the ones that were interviewed and chosen for interviewing. My point is, who's choosing, I had written down some notes about, is it the hiring manager who goes through all of the applications and picks who gets interviewed? Is it and if that's true, is that just the person who oversees, like you had mentioned, the supervisor of that person?
I still think that what you're talking about is better handled in the regulation guidelines or whatever it is you're going to develop in response to this, because you don't want to overload a policy and make it so specific that if you change a word or a comma, you have to revisit the policy. I do think that and I'm going to move to the general stuff that you would do in relationship to the policy, but I do think that if people work in an office and they have had satisfactory ratings and they're applying for a promotion, they ought to at least be interviewed. Whether you choose somebody else, that's a decision that you could, as Sammy said, put on paper as to why. But I do think that everybody who meets basic qualifications has had a satisfactory rating and they're in an office where they're applying for the next level, I do believe they should be interviewed. I think that's something you don't put in the policy.
Is there a way that we can make it so that's included? But because we can't oversee the regulation, so I just agree with exactly what you said. So
the board can direct the superintendent to include in regulation.
We can say what we would like to see in the regulation.
I didn't know that. So.
I've got
All due
some
respect,
things
I
that
feel
I
like
would
we've
like
been
to-
saying a lot of the things that we want to see in relation to the appointments process, and it's the integrity of the process is not ironed out, in my opinion.
And that's what should be ironed out in the guidelines, so.
Because we shouldn't be hiring people who are under the hiring manager if the hiring manager hasn't been hired yet.
That's something that I'm going to talk about for the guidelines.
Okay.
But I don't think that's a policy issue. I do, and I've looked at several of the comments. Some of these comments really need to be incorporated into whatever guidelines you're
And I have a
developing.
couple of suggestions for those, too.
And I've got some when we get to that stage when you finish walking us through the policy.
She's finished walking us through, so that's why
okay. So I
I'm
have-
saying this is like outside stuff, like I've got a couple of from the comments, so you go ahead.
Okay, let me see. I have a couple of just, I'm not saying everything, but they were good comments that I thought we should think about. Like this one, this person says they feel like the APs are the last ones to know when an acting principal has been identified. I think as a matter of courtesy, if you're the assistant principal, you ought to know when an acting principal has been identified. And I can accept that they might want to know that before the staff does, so that they can get whatever feelings they have out about it before the staff knows. So that's the kind of thing I would like to see. Another one, let's see. Okay, this person says the interview panel doesn't seem like their voices are heard since ranking is no longer allowed. I know the notes go to the board, but I do think you ought to have something in there that addresses that.
Yep.
You know, whatever it
the public.
is, something needs
Right.
to
Here's why we picked this
address
person.
that issue. And they want to know, what does vetting look like? I think
I have that on my
we
page.
want to be clear about what vetting means in whatever we're doing. It says, appointment process seems to be changed a lot due to the frequent change in leadership. Would like to see consistent leadership so that it does not boil down to one person having all the institutional knowledge. That's not a comment I want you to put in it. But that's the very reason why we need the process written down, so that the next person that comes along will know what it is. This, though, I do want you to include, will people be vetted each time they apply for a principal position?
Or
And
any
I would
oh,
suggest
go ahead.
that absolutely, as we've talked about that before. And this one, I don't know what you would say, but I do think it's important to consider community and staff concerns when a school has so many acting principals. They would like a timeline put in there for hiring, because a lot of them feel like they're sort of languishing. Also, and I don't know how you feel about this, it's just my thought on this, but they said it would be nice to have the directors that are going to be above the principals have some interviewing, be in the interview
they should be on the
process for that.
Agreed. Agreed with that.
think-
I fully agree with
But that goes back to what I was trying to
Yes,
determine
exactly.
before, because it's just not
I
being
do
done
think
right.
you hire the office director before you hire the people under them, so. I've got a whole list here, I don't know if you, I thought some of these comments were really, really
too.
relevant. Okay, is there a chance for people to respond to the regulations regarding the promotions process before you all actually implement them? I don't know the answer to that. Is there, does the staff get to respond to it? I just don't know the answer to that. If not, I think it actually would be a good idea to send it out to people and get comment on it.
So that is not a standard process in regulation, but we do have a history of when specific regulations have been identified as having a particularly heightened public interest. We have done that in the past.
Well, I think it's important to build public trust around the process to do that this time. Let me see. Okay. Can you identify the actual positions that will be participating on the appointments committee, not by
Right.
name, but by position?
Right. And how many people are on that committee
Okay.
or the application?
And this one, I think we could all agree to. If we have a unique position, it's important that we have an expert on the panel that knows what that
Agreed.
position is. And if I'm taking all the time, I don't want to take it all, but I have a whole list of start things here. So
I've
I'm
got a
just
list
going.
too, so you go
going
right
through-
on ahead.
Let's see. The candidate feedback after an interview. We should have some sort of feedback process. I think we already do, but at least it should be known what it is. Okay.
I think that would also be good for people who didn't get
This
an
one I thought was,
interview.
I do agree with this. MCCPTA said they would like parents to have at least one question for the principal panel. I
agree with that,
actually
too.
like that
I do, too.
idea and think that that would be very helpful to us.
Can we apply that to students as well from that school?
absolutely.
A
Yes,
student
absolutely.
should have a guaranteed question as well
Yep.
for the principal.
I think that's,
totally
I
agree with
think that may be in one of these
It
comments.
probably
But
is.
that's a good idea, thank you.
Dr. Harris wants to make a comment. Go ahead.
We can have any questions you want, but if you start adding, there's only usually a certain amount of time. So if you say one from the parents, one from the students, it doesn't leave a lot of space, but we can always do a variety. Or maybe if you want to have what we've done in the past is a bank of questions that the parents and students can do and that we can pull from that. So we can use the other questions for, like you might have something about students or the curriculum, so then we can incorporate that with other ones. But if you say, if we can only have 5 or 6 questions within the first period of time, it's going to lock us in to.
Well, who decided you could only have 5?
Well, I mean, you could do a litany of questions, but if you only have a short period of time, you want to make sure that each candidate is able to answer all of the questions. So, and you're saying now that you would like to have, if you're talking about 7 or 8 candidates, we usually try to do it within a block. To have a community come or a big group, you have to limit the amount of questions you do, especially if you have a large panel that you're going to interview.
Well, yeah, I hear you. I don't know how you resolve this issue,
think-
but I do
right.
think
Yeah.
that the parents, particularly
Yeah.
in the building that's going to be affected,
Right.
ought to have a question answered. And the students too.
I fully agree. I think that is just something that's so important to me, that especially when you see, let's say a principal come forward, that I'd feel a lot more comfortable knowing that there was a guaranteed question asked by a parent and by a student. And, I know there's always going to be, restraints to processes, but that's just something that I think is so unbelievably important, knowing that a lot of students always want to have input on that process, and parents as well. So I think that is something I still would support if we can figure out a way to resolve that problem, but I'm very in support of that.
Can I ask a clarifying question of Dr. Harris? With that bank of questions, then when we pull it, that could be the question that either the student or the parent could ask, right? Because
That's
we currently
correct.
do that. We have a bank of questions that we pull that could.
They want ones that are relevant to their issues, though.
I mean, it's up to you, but also, are you saying in the first round or the second round? Because we have more than, there's the first round, the final round, if the superintendent decides to pull from there as well. So are you
The
saying?
students and parents aren't included in the second round,
Right, but she's saying
correct?
to
No,
have a
but we
question
can
that would go
still,
along
we
with.
still have to, we could let you know what questions we utilize or use, but, if you limit us to the first round, it's harder to do that. But we could do whatever you ask us to do. I was just trying to give you background information on what that would look like, because we also want to make sure that if you're saying you want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity who can apply for the job, you're going to make the list larger, and we can't have the same group for like 2 or 3 days, so we try to limit. But if you're saying it doesn't have to be in the first round, but maybe the final round, it's up to you, but there's more than one.
But if they're not there, I feel like it can't be in the second round, because that's part of, the answers to the questions will be part of what they would be rating the person on. So that would be not valuable. Now, I will say that perhaps we could look at some questions from the parents to put into that bulk thing, and some questions from the students, and then you can pick, but as long as one of those is picked from each of the 5 questions that you do, you pick one from at least each of those categories, I could live with that.
I think when the directors host the community meeting, they can ask what questions would students have and what questions would parents have, and provide that to the team, and we'll ask the question.
I like that. That's a
I do
good
too.
idea.
I just, again, I'm going to go back to the current upcoming situation where directors who are going to be supervising those principals were not included in the hiring panel, so they wouldn't have the opportunity to do that, especially if we're going out of order and hiring like directors before associates and things like that. So where does that leave us in terms of hosting a community event if you don't even know who's going to be overseeing that school, that community?
If a director hasn't been assigned, it would be the chief of schools, because the chief would know all the schools.
Yeah, there are going to be times when you have to hire the director first, because, there may be already existing staff that they're going to inherit, so we can't lock them in that way, to me at least.
If we're going to have a consistent way of doing things, then it should be, and again, I was taking what the school system had put together in terms of what the order should be, and I just want to see it being applied.
And I think that's right if that's the situation you have, where there are people under being hired before the director. But generally, it just happens to be a vacancy and we're hiring a director. So,
Yes. Yeah, no, I understand.
Thank you. I appreciate your taking the time to listen.
Does anybody else have, before I go, or are you good? Okay.
I think Brenda got them.
I got
That's okay.
more.
It's okay. Doesn't matter who say it, as long as it's said. Go ahead.
Yeah, so on page 5 of the comments, suggestion number 16, I agree with them in terms of changing the language. So the comment reads, it's lawyerly jargon, the finals has been determined to be clear of any pending or open investigations. And the comment reads, that's not good enough after the big mess up we have had. It should read very simply, and I 100% agree with this language, but no candidate for a position will be considered until the outcome of any pending external or internal investigation is complete, and such outcome is made fully available to the board. The board shall be required to enter into the record the outcomes of such investigation. The board shall make express reference to the outcome of such investigations in its decisions. It's just clarifying that we are fully aware of everything that's going on and that it's been addressed.
I agree with that. It just specifies what's already there, makes it
Right.
very clear, makes it public and transparent. I like that that's a solid amendment.
Yeah,
So
thank
you would
you.
just go with the wording that was already in the public comment. I mean, they clearly, nailed it there. They
Yeah.
did their research.
I'm assuming it was a lawyer who
Yeah, it might have been, yeah.
wrote that one. And then on page.
Ms. Mondrowski?
Sorry, yes.
I have a question, Mr. Said. For the language, as written here in the comment, made fully, through where it says investigation is complete and such outcome is made fully available to the board, where it's, I have no feedback there, but the next sentence, the board shall be required to enter into the record the outcome and make express reference to the outcome in its decision. So I don't know exactly what is intended there, but if the.
Where is it?
I'm reading the language that was in comment 16.
Oh, okay.
The first full sentence is the second sentence of that section, second two sentences. The board shall be required to enter into the record the outcome of such investigation, and the board shall make express reference to the outcome of such investigation in its decision. So I don't know exactly precisely what is meant there, but enter into the record the outcome of such investigation, if that means the outcome of an investigation into an employee, and if the record is public, that we cannot do that. So I don't know what's meant there. I think we should discuss that further before those last two sentences are added to the policy, which is what I understood the direction to be, to add the comment in totality there.
I understand what you're saying, Stephanie. I think that it probably should end at is complete and such outcome is made fully available to the board.
Right,
Yeah.
and
That
maybe
should be the
be part of
end
the
of it.
attestation, actually, that it's been done. And I forget, I'm looking through, because I know I took notes from here, a lot of them, but there's one area where, and I think I listed in with the comments from but we need to include past, and we need to, in terms of investigations, any current or ongoing and past investigations, because that's not included in the policy. At least I didn't see it. I wrote down somewhere where I wanted to add it, but.
I think, Ms. Key, is that included in the vetting process?
It is.
Is that
It's part of
referenced, is it referenced here? I know that's something I've seen in your.
Yes.
But is it here in the
It
policy?
is not in the policy.
Oh, I know where it is, on page 8, on line 221. Starting at 220, the finalist has been determined to be clear of any you have pending or open investigations. I want past or / prior, whichever you want to use. And again, I think that was I got that from one of the comments. Yeah. And the other thing that I have is you all wrote, and this is from comment number 9, on page 9 of the comments, or maybe it's not this one, but whatever. Appropriate investigations, how is that defined? Is that just DCI? Is it, are we using, like the current supervisor, will they be involved? Is there the labor relations people, are they involved? If it's the IG, I want clarity that appropriate investigation, that the appropriate investigation unit incorporates all of those different aspects. And then again, like I said, it determines the clear of any determines to be clear of any past or prior pending or open investigations. And the other thing that I feel like we need to add, because I know that there are different things, and certain things fall under like get investigation, but complaints, grievances, or allegations, I would like to see those included, please, in the listing of things that are screened for them to be clear of, if I'm making sense.
Could you run that list again? Complaints, allegations, or did you say a third?
Complaints, grievances, or allegations.
Grievances was the word I missed.
Yes, and what the outcomes are of those.
You've lost me. Where are you putting that?
On page 8, on line 222, it just reads, or from 221, starting at 220, any pending or open investigations. It's not just investigations. It needs to be if there's complaints, because someone could have complaints made against them that doesn't rise to the level of an investigation necessarily. It's more of a grievance, but that doesn't necessarily make for a positive work environment, because I'm just utilizing, that's what happened with one of our past principals. Complaints were made. They weren't necessarily all felt to be risen to the level of an investigation, and there's a difference in terms of grievances versus, because I think one goes through the union stuff and the others do not. And I just want to make sure that we've covered all of the bases, and that's where we are. Because I too want the MCPS community to have the utmost confidence in the integrity of selection and appointment processes. Yeah, and then the other one I had, you said you addressed, I wanted you to take out the candidates being informed of the categories of stakeholders, but I was thinking it was the individual, like specifically. Although, actually, no. Now that I'm thinking about it, wait. And I do think this was one of the comments. But, yeah, so as an example, I'm just curious why the applicant needs that information. Because so for example, if they see on their list that there's going to be a representative from MCCPTA and they're, close to the president or something, and they want to know, the ability to reach out and plea your case, and by the way, it has been done before. Like I've heard from people, who've been like, oh, yeah, the principal reached out to me to ask me to put in a good word, or the applicant. This was years ago, but it has happened. So I just want to understand better what would be the necessity in telling them who's on the panel.
Candidates don't get to know who's on the panel.
It reads.
You get to know who's on the panel.
Oh, okay, because here, candidates will be informed ahead of time of the necessary steps and timeline expected when applying for a board-appointed position. MCPS will establish standards for categories of stakeholders to be represented on the interview panels for school-based and central office-based positions. Then it reads, candidates will be informed of the categories of stakeholders represented on the panel prior to the interview. So I'd like that removed. We'll just take it off. Thank you. And I think that was pretty much the last thing I had. The other questions that I had really were based on some clarity from like the checklist thing that we received. And I'm not sure exactly what the relationship is to that and the policy, but I was trying to look through it and make sure that the things that were listed in here, like the hiring manager versus the appointments committee versus the people who are in the final, whatever you call it, the final interview. I just would really like some better clarification, so it's not 3 different people picking who gets to be interviewed one day, and then the next day it's one person who's just going through and picking, and there's needs to be consistency. It doesn't necessarily always have to be the same person, but they should have the same type of responsibility levels, and they should, in my opinion, incorporate someone who is they're going to be supervising, or who's going to be supervising that position, whether it's the superintendent or whatever, but some consistency in how these choices are made is what is going to give both our staff and our community a better sense of trust. And that's part of why the screening chart I thought would be important, so that we can say, okay, this is what if you look at the job application or the job description, here's what we need each candidate who's qualified to have, and then check those so that we can say, okay, this person fit all the boxes, this person hit all the boxes, this person hit all the boxes, and I just think it'll make it a much easier process.
No, I'm totally okay with that. And I think, also being like someone who, I remember being new on the board and all that and not understanding what the process was, that would be very helpful in making it clear to me what the steps are. Because definitely kind of, when I was new, when I first started, like I wasn't actually sure what, brought people to before the board. So I think that process would be helpful for new board members, for student members who are changing every single year. So I'm in support of that as well.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Mondrowski, for clarity, I'm sorry, I've lost a little bit of track of where.
That's okay. It was a lot.
What the board is, as Ms. Webb said, directing the superintendent to include in the regulations versus the policy. So this last section, that category that you were just talking about, identifying the process by which persons will be identified for being interviewed and who will be involved in that process. Is that in the list of directives for the superintendent for the recommendations that will be sent out for public comment?
I'm totally confused now.
I was going to say,
Where
I'm
are you?
confused with what you're actually talking about, to be honest.
I'm confused with what
You were saying
So the last topic that we were just talking
on
about.
page, which page are we on?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
So we were talking
it.
about identifying the individuals who will be responsible for selecting candidates to be interviewed, and the process, perhaps a checklist, that will be followed for selecting individuals to be interviewed. That's what I'm speaking about. And
yeah.
I'm saying that I'm not
You're saying
clear.
you want to know if it should be regulations instead of
That's my
policy.
question to you.
And perhaps, yes, but I do think that some of the, again, my concern is not identifying a specific person necessarily, but having a procedure that can be followed every time for every position so that no one feels that they were handpicked or that other people were handpicked to make a decision as to who is going to fill that position based on who somebody likes, who somebody gets along with, or whatever.
Okay, do we address
that is not a policy issue, though. Again, that's a regulation issue.
Well, I think the description, the details of it are regulations, but I just felt like it should be somewhere shown that it will be done.
I think if we're directing the superintendent to include that in the regulation, that's a directive. I mean, that's something that they would have to do. Right?
So on page 4, under the implementation strategies,
Yeah.
So right at 246,
Yeah.
it says efficient interview. The section starts with the superintendent will establish regulations or procedures, et cetera,
Yes.
for including efficient interview and appointment protocols.
Yes, that's where I actually started thinking about it.
Okay, so since the superintendent has been directed to establish regulations for efficient interview protocols, does that cover that now
we
we've
just-
been directed to, and these are comments as to what you specifically want us to include in the regulation, like a checklist for identifying the candidates to be interviewed?
Yeah, there was a word I wanted to add, I would be satisfied with that, I think, but there was, hold on, now okay. Identify eligible candidates, establish safeguards to provide for partiality of individuals, initial screening. You said something about whatever. In what you just read, I'm sorry, if I don't know where.
Bottom of page 8, line 246.
Okay. Efficient interview and appointment protocols. So I would just like to add consistent and efficient.
Consistent and efficient?
Yes.
Okay.
And I can be satisfied with that as long as it's very clearly specified in the regulations.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Sure. Well, thank you for asking, because you inspired me, so. Okay, I think that's more or less all I have, assuming we're not talking about this checklist. Is that correct? Okay, I didn't know why I got this checklist for, so I thought it was going with the policy stuff, so. Okay, so does anybody have anything else? I think I've covered all my thoughts and concerns.
Ms. Mondrowski, I think it might just be helpful for everyone if we could kind of do a recap of the different pieces that we may be looking, I guess, in two categories. One would be specific requested changes to the policy itself that will move forward for recommendation to the full board. The second would be directives independently that would be included in the regulations.
Yes.
Okay, so maybe I think the best way to do that maybe would be for staff to kind of walk through what you've captured, and then if there are any differences or additions that need to be made to that list, we could talk through that.
You good with that?
Could we have just a moment to, we're all scrambling notes here. Just give us just a moment
Sure.
to confer.
And while you're doing that, I just also want to add that what I heard the committee say is that this is a regulation that they want to go out to public comment.
Yes,
That's fine.
absolutely.
That's fine. If we can, just a moment.
Thank you, Mr. Lockman, for that clarification.
Yes.
I'm wondering if in the new space, if we have situations like this, there's new capacity for some kind of, kind of like if you're at a sporting event.
Yeah.
If you're at if you're on a sporting event, there's some kind of, sack race or.
I don't understand, I can't hear what you're saying. Do you want the microphone on and speak so we can hear you, or do you want it off?
I'm wondering if we have any halftime entertainment.
Oh, yes, right? We got to start bringing in like chorus groups from our schools to sing, when we have a little break. Yes. We could do the do, 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 do. Yes.
I was at a budget hearing at Blair. They had Oliver was the musical there this spring, and so they had the cast come through. Oh, that's funny. During a break.
Oh, that's really cool.
We could do trivia during the break, right?
I like that. Of course, I would be humiliated by how much more you know than me.
This new board space is just so
Yep. I know.
so great.
It's bright, no windows. Our old space didn't have any windows either, though, so.
Yeah, we're gonna look at decorations.
Yes. I assume we will be putting wall cover, artwork and stuff from our students?
Yeah, we're very excited. We're gonna honor on a rotating basis the arts that go on in our schools, both the elementary, middle, and high school. And we even have a space for ceramics and sculpture.
Love that, yes, yes. It'll be nice, because then kids can invite their parents to come tour their own little art gallery. As long as we can figure out how to make sure we get all of the high schools or whatever included, or the middle schools, whatever we're doing. We don't want anybody to feel like
It should only take us 211 months.
Exactly.
We can pass those
Exactly.
photos of all the board members.
Oh, yeah, we could pass on that. Pass on the giant photos. Although the county council do have lovely headshots in front of their conference room. Mhm.
Okay, we think we have
They
it.
have them outside that room
Yep.
too, yeah.
Yep.
All right, so we hear four things.
Okay.
For the policy, we heard a lot of feedback for the regulation. but
For the regulations.
For the policy, we heard line 111 will read, current staff, comma, temporary part-time employees, comma, or consultants.
Yes.
All right. Lines 145 to 148 will be deleted.
Yes.
Lines 219 to 222 will be replaced with a modified version of comment 16. The comment reads, no candidate for a position will be considered until the outcome of any pending or internal investigation is complete and such outcome is fully available to the board. You want us to work into that sentence, complaints, grievances, or allegations.
Yes, and I would like the word past or prior added in there as well.
Yes, yes.
And I don't, for some reason, I kept thinking that there was another area where it lists investigations, and for consistency, anytime you have that, if you could please ensure that it has all of the type of investigations, that would be great. Meaning the complaints, the grievances, and the allegations.
Okay, and then the last one we heard was line 246, consistent and efficient interview and appointment protocols.
Yep.
I think there was one more about having the explanation. Or was that regulation?
Correct.
That's regulation? Okay.
Yeah, I guess we thought that would be regulation with the checklist and stuff. And for some reason I thought, yep, nope, that was everything.
Okay.
Because that was a regulation. You're right.
If I could maybe seek one clarification real quick, when we were talking about the third item that was just mentioned, paragraph 3 under section D, this is line 219 to 222, regarding past complaints, just making sure that we're all of the same mind on the definition of a complaint. In terms of what I wouldn't want in this case is a parent submits a complaint via email about a specific incident in a specific school 4 years ago that they don't feel was addressed, but is not anything that ever would have come to the attention of the staff as part of a hiring process. So I don't believe that's what's intended. I'm just wanting to make sure that what I'm hearing the committee say is for complaints that have gone through a process that it would have been received by administration. Not only a complaint that was received by the individual themselves.
By the individual.
I think that, and
I don't think I
Ms. Key
understand.
may be able to help, but I think that the two categories that we can for certain verify are the investigations that are conducted by DCI and the grievance, formal grievances that are managed by labor relations.
Yeah, so is there, I guess I just want to make sure, is there anything outside?
I circled appropriate investigations and I added other groups that, I just don't want it to be just DCI essentially. Like I said, if there's an investigation from the IG, or if there's an investigation under labor relations or.
I have a follow-up. I just want to understand. I thought that there was a distinction in that there is a personnel file in the school building that the principal may have been keeping. Didn't we say that? And didn't you say that you would check that, ask if there was one?
We would look at a personnel file if it were someone coming out of a school, so a teacher looking to be an AP. But a principal's file, we would look for what the director had and then what is in the personnel file.
Ms. Mondrowski, with the word formal complaint?
I can't hear you, Elsie.
See, that's actually where my concern is if she asked if it was formal complaints.
Since Tom raised that question, it raised in my mind if the principal handled it and maybe they handled 2 or 3 complaints in their building so that they didn't have to rise to the level. What do we do with those?
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that. I'm relying on you all.
Well, I would be concerned about our ability to be consistent and thorough if it's not in a formalized, one of our formalized, and certainly the Office of Inspector General, I was speaking internally, but that, of course, could be, or any other external agency that we have knowledge of. Plenty of times that they are doing investigations and we don't have knowledge until they come up with a conclusion.
Right.
But I'm just thinking, how would we consistently know that a supervisor of anyone has had a letter of conference kind of conversation with an employee, and that does in fact stay in the supervisor's file?
But doesn't the supervisor put it in the employee's file?
Not if it's, I don't let them speak to that.
We wouldn't know what they put in the file.
Well, shouldn't we look at an employee's file before we recommend them for?
We look at a personnel file. We don't go out to the school and look at the files for teachers who are putting in to be assistant principals.
I think, though, that what we're just trying to get is a common understanding of what's going to be looked at. That's what Tom is saying, because it would beg the question.
And I'll call it the supervisor, because it could be a principal or director, but the supervisor may have a file where they've had an initial conversation with an employee and said, on this date, you didn't handle this thing correctly, or maybe this is the third time you've missed a deadline or something like that. So we're going to have a conversation, we're going to document it, I sign it, you sign it, but it stays in my folder. And then it stays there unless it happens again, and then it becomes a reprimand or something like that. And so it's been sort of a progressive.
And at that point, it would go to the file, to the personnel file.
I'll let Brenda think on that for a minute.
No, I understand their dilemma, because the other thing is the person could have been in 3 or 4 different schools.
Right.
So I understand the dilemma. But you're saying if it rises to the level of a reprimand from the principal, it goes into the personnel. I think that's the level we have to start with then, because otherwise they'd have to go to every school the person's ever worked at.
Right. No, all right, I can agree to that. That's, or did you have?
No,
Okay.
So could I maybe recommend then, for purposes of interpretation, that be a concept that is addressed in the regulation, specifying what, if we're talking about complaints here and we aren't defining it in that strictly.
Why wouldn't we define it, though? If I mean, even just adding the word formal, or, I mean, that's what they said, but, and then breaking it down in the regulation, but I'm open to.
Yeah, I
what's
think that's, I think it sounds like what I'm hearing the committee say is just ensuring a common understanding of whether we say complaint, formal complaint, that everyone is of the same understanding as to what that means.
Right.
And to what level that extends.
Right.
Exactly where that lives, yeah, I think that, we just need to find the right place for it.
Okay. And then I did find the other thing that I thought that I was just looking for, but again, I'm not 100% sure it's a policy thing, but because it's written in here on page 3, line 86, or page 3, 3A, the superintendent of schools shall establish an appointments committee composed of MCPS leaders of associate superintendent level or above for the purposes of making recommendations to the superintendent of school. This is where I had my concerns about, so the appointments committee versus, so did the appointments committee go through all of the applications? And if somebody different's doing that, do the appointments committee get to know who applied and who was picked and who wasn't picked? And if not, why not? And because I just don't understand the hiring manager, the applications people, and then the appointments committee.
I can explain that to you. So HR receives the application. My team goes through the application and identifies everyone who's eligible, meets the minimum qualifications for the job. Then the list goes to the hiring manager. They have the opportunity to look through the list, make determinations on who they think they'd like to interview, and then the list in its entirety is presented at appointments. As the hiring manager discusses each of the candidates that they want to move forward to the first interview, and then they also discuss why people aren't moving forward from the other list. If the appointments committee has ideas or says, oh, but this person's really good, I think you want to do it, then the hiring manager just moves them over and says, I'll interview them as well.
Okay. So, okay, well, that's why I want the consistency in the application person or the hiring manager person.
So I think the concern is when the superintendent is a hiring manager.
My concern is that the hiring manager seems to change depending on, and I understand it should for some, like, again, to me, it's about the supervising aspect. They definitely should be part of the hiring management, but I just don't know. I feel like somebody else is picking and then who they're going to give to the hiring manager, and then the hiring manager, because we had this situation before where our chief of schools was asked, if there was anybody else that they thought would have been good, and because they had not seen the list, they would have no idea who else
He
would
had
have
saw
been
the
it.
list. He knew. And he said that he knew, that there was nobody else that he thought was qualified to do the work. So when the hiring manager is the superintendent, there is no appointments committee, because the people in appointments committee are the people who are putting in for her job, for the job that she is hiring manager for. So when she gives me a list, or he, whoever the superintendent will be, gives me a list, that's the list that's going forward.
Okay. Okay. All right, sounds good. Well, then we should be all set, so if people have concerns, they can make formal complaints. Does anybody have anything else? You sure, Tom?
No, I don't. I think unless there are outstanding questions or clarifications on anyone else's part, just want to have cleared those up.
I would offer, we've all been taking lots of notes, but if Mrs. Wolf or others would like to give us a copy of your starred pages, we could make sure.
Okay.
Whether it's your starred pages or a revised version, or, we would be welcome to, happy to receive that.
Okay, that works. Thank you. So I guess with that, I will, does it need to come back to policy, or can I still move it forward with the amendments made? I don't feel like any of the amendments turned out to be as big as I thought maybe they would be, but.
I think based on the recap that we just had on the policy, I believe everyone to be of the same understanding of the language.
Okay.
And so as it relates specifically to the policy, look to move that forward. If there's a
Right.
separate conversation to be had regarding directives associated with the language in the regulations, and those being presented to this group and put out for public comment, that is a separate conversation.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, yes, and that's a conversation we want to have. So, all right, then I will move that we forward the policy, GEA, board appointment of MCPS leaders to the full board for tentative final action.
Second.
All in favor? It's unanimous. And we just keep on moving. So at this point, I just want to check and see if any of the members of the committee have any questions regarding the items of information on regulations that was approved by the interim superintendent's office between February and April of this year. No? Okay. Well, then, that concludes our meeting for today. And I have to say, it was a nice one for the first meeting ever to be held in this building. Hopefully someone took a picture. Did you want to do a selfie? Oh, yeah. All right, well, thank you all very much for coming, and we are adjourned.